Hey everybody, it's Norm from Tested, and today I'm going to be reviewing DJI's new Phantom 4 quadcopter. I've been flying it for about a month, testing out three important features. The three features that I was most curious about when we first previewed this quad, and that it's new optical sensing cameras in the front, its sport mode, and also the extended battery life. If you recall, the Phantom 3 Advance was my favorite quadcopter from last year. It was totally a rock-solid dolly in the sky, so I was really curious to see what features DJI would put in this year's Phantom 4 to justify its $1,400 cost. So first of all, there's the new camera system, and there are a bunch of cameras on the Phantom 4. The most notable camera, of course, is going to be the camera you're shooting photos and videos with. And it's almost exactly the same camera system as last year's P3 Professional. It shoots in 4K. There's a slightly new gimbal housing system that's a little more integrated with the body. The whole thing is a little more sleek, and new electronics in the camera system that allow it to shoot at 120 FPS in a pretty cropped in 1080p video format. But aside from that primary camera, there are also new cameras that allow it a more situational awareness around the world. We're talking about computer vision, and most notable are these two cameras on the front of the quadcopter. They're stereo cameras that work in unison to look at about a 60-degree field of view into the world to look at obstacles as the quadcopter is flying. So the idea is, as you're flying, if you get up to within 50 feet of a object, you're going to get an on-screen indicator on your phone or tablet to let you know how close you are to the object. And if you toggle on obstacle avoidance, the quadcopter will actually stop at any speed before it gets to that obstacle, whether it's a wall, a tree, or a fence, or another person, and then actually stop. And if you toggle a second feature, it will actually move away or back up away from that obstacle as well. The whole idea is to give you some peace of mind as you're flying the quadcopter. And DJI it seems like they really want to make this quad user-friendly and a good quadcopter for beginning pilots. Now, because there are only two sensors on the front and they only have that 60-degree field of view, I never felt comfortable relying on those camera systems for obstacle avoidance. You always want to maintain your line of sight on the quadcopter itself, and I was only able to use the on-screen indicator to see if I was to judge how far away I was from an obstacle, but not actually go pull on full throttle and try to run it into a building, which I did test, and yes, it does work. Now, the obstacle avoidance system also works in tandem with the new active subject tracking, and this is also a cool use of computer vision. In theory, the quadcopter, using its main camera, will look out into the world, and when you have active subject tracking turned on, you can actually draw a box around subjects, people mostly, and the gimbal, will turn to follow that subject as that subject walks across the frame. Now, there are some caveats to this system as well. It only works in certain lighting conditions and with high contrast. The subjects need to be pretty isolated in their environments. Any occlusion between obstacles or low light areas will make it lose tracking pretty quickly. And even when tracking is perfect, the gimbal turning, the camera turning to follow the subject, wasn't so smooth a motion that I could completely rely on the active subject tracking to create the perfect shots that I wanted. It kept the subject in frame for the most part, but you had to get pretty close to the subject, and I wanted to test it to maybe follow a person as they were walking down the side of a street, but it never worked as well as I imagined it in my head. Now, all of the subject tracking and obstacle avoidance systems only work in the normal mode, and a new mode with the P4 is the sport mode. Sport mode amplifies and adjusts the ways the quadcopter flies, amplifies the speed to go up to 45 miles per hour. Again, theoretically. In my test, I was never able to get a sustained flight of over about 41 miles per hour before the quadcopter started freaking out, the battery started overheating, and the quadcopter slowed down itself back to the normal speed. The normal speed itself actually is decreased in this year's model from last year. It only tops at about 30 miles per hour in normal speed, as opposed to about 35 miles per hour in last year's P3. And obstacle avoidance only works, like I said, in normal speed. So I would expect a lot of users, if they toggle on sport mode, to really be aware that they do not have obstacle avoidance, and if they're flying at 40 miles per hour, they will fly into a wall if they're not careful. The increased speed and maneuverability offered by sport mode also is a huge battery drain, and that's why in this year's model, DJI put a much higher capacity battery in the Phantom 4. Now, they're claiming about 28 minutes of battery life, and in my conversation with them, they were confident that it would, in some tests, would go over even half an hour, 30 minutes of battery life. Again, I was disappointed because I never got even close to that mark. In all of my tests, my battery performance ranged about 23 to 24 minutes before the quadcopter was about a 10% battery life and needed to return home. And even if you adjust your sliders in the menu system so you don't get a warning until the battery is about 25% or 20%, I was only able to get about 18 to 20 minutes of actual usable camera flight time shooting video before the quadcopter had to come home, far from the claimed 28 minutes. So those three features, the increased battery life, the new sport mode, and the active tracking system, optical avoidance system, it's really, unfortunately, it's not all there. I think they had some really good ideas, and there was a lot of work put into getting those ideas working, and they worked to some extent, but it's not the complete package. In the future, I'd hope to see optical avoidance on not just 60-degree field of view, but around the entire quadcopter to give you really a real secure peace of mind when flying it, and also fewer compromises with battery life and with the sport mode. So my recommendation is, if you're looking for a new quadcopter, look at last year's model. The P3 Advanced and Professional have been heavily discounted. The Phantom 3 Advanced, which was my favorite quadcopter of last year, is selling for about $800 now, which is $600 cheaper than the P4, and then that allows you to buy more accessories like batteries or even the HDMI output for the transmitter, so you can use things like the Avegant Glyph or any display with the quadcopter. I think the P4, while it's the fourth generation Phantom, really feels like the first generation in terms of the technologies that they want to put in the future of quadcopter. So let's wait a couple years. Let's get the battery life well above 30 minutes. Let's get the camera sensing working better, and that's when we can finally recommend those technologies. So that's it with the Phantom 4 quadcopter. I really don't think this is a beginner quadcopter. It shouldn't be anyone's very first quadcopter for sure, even with features like automatic takeoff and landing and return to home, and now some obstacle avoidance. I think if you're going to be spending over $500 on a quad, buy a beginner quad that you can fly in home, that can learn 2-stick transmitters, and then look at maybe last year's Phantom 3 Advanced or Professional if you want a quadcopter with a really nice built-in gimbaled camera. That's it for today. We'll have more reviews on Tested.com. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and I'll see you next time. Bye.